All right, so today we're diving into Entra ID. You sent over a ton of articles and research, and everything seems to point to Entra ID as like the next big thing in identity management, especially for anyone working in the Microsoft Azure world.
Yeah,
And I think you're smart to be curious about this. You want to know not just what it is, but why it even matters
right.
when it comes to security.
Absolutely. I think what's really interesting about Entra ID is how it tackles those challenges. The challenges of managing user identities in the cloud, especially these days with the rise of remote work and all the cloud apps. That traditional security perimeter, well, it's basically vanished. It's not just about protecting your network anymore. It's about protecting the identities that can access your data from anywhere.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. But
Right.
before we go too deep, how would you explain Azure Active Directory, Azure AD? I mean, that's like the foundation here, right?
Yeah, Azure AD, think of it as like the control center. The control center for your whole digital kingdom. It's Microsoft's cloud-based platform that manages. It manages who gets access to what within your whole organization. This includes everything, your everyday Office 365 apps, powerful Azure services, even thousands of other applications.
So it's like, remember that super organized bouncer we were talking about?
Yes.
But for the entire digital world, making sure only the right people get in, and they only go where they're supposed to.
Yeah, precisely. Now imagine taking that concept and just amplifying it with even more security and more advanced capabilities. That's where Entra ID comes in. It builds upon Azure AD and adds like a whole new layer of sophistication to identity management.
Okay, I'm getting VIP access to a super exclusive club vibes here, but why should our listener care? How does Entra ID translate to like real world benefits for people?
Let's talk security. With Entra ID, you're not just reacting to threats, you're proactively preventing them. Imagine this scenario: an employee's credentials are compromised. Entra ID can actually use machine learning to detect unusual login patterns, like attempts from a location or a device that's not familiar, and it can automatically step in to block access or trigger multi-factor authentication.
So it's like having a security guard who's not just checking IDs at the door, but they're constantly monitoring the security cameras
Yes.
and anticipating problems before they even happen.
Exactly. And let's not forget compliance. A lot of industries have, stringent regulations around data privacy and access control. Entra ID provides tools to help demonstrate compliance, like detailed audit logs and automated provisioning and deprovisioning of access. It can save organizations a ton of headaches when it comes to meeting those regulatory requirements.
Compliance headaches are the worst. So Entra ID is this powerful guardian at the gate. But does it make life more difficult for everyday users? Or can it actually boost productivity?
Well, it can actually make everyone's lives easier. With features like self-service password reset, users can regain access to their accounts without needing to contact IT, and single sign-on, SSO, allows users to access multiple applications with just one set of credentials, which reduces the frustration of remembering multiple passwords.
Less time wrestling with passwords, more time getting things done. I like the sound of that. Okay, let's start unpacking some of these Entra ID superpowers. You mentioned advanced identity governance earlier. What does that look like in action?
Okay, so imagine a healthcare organization using Entra ID to control access to patient records. With advanced identity governance, they can set up very specific rules. Only doctors specializing in cardiology, for example, would be granted access to heart patients' records. This level of granular control minimizes the risk of unauthorized access, while also ensuring that doctors can efficiently access the information they need to care for their patients.
Okay, that's a fantastic example. It's not just about like blanket permissions anymore. It's about really fine-tuning who gets to see what, based on their specific role and need. I'm already seeing how this could be a game changer for organizations dealing with sensitive data.
Yeah, and that's just scratching the surface. We haven't even touched on features like unified identity protection, which uses AI to proactively detect and respond to threats in real time.
Hold on, AI that's actually working to keep us safe. Tell me more.
Welcome back. We were just starting to uncover the power of Entra ID's unified identity protection. It's like a fascinating blend of security and artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah, I'm all ears. You mentioned AI working behind the scenes. How does that actually play out in protecting identities?
Think of it like this. Unified identity protection is constantly analyzing user behavior patterns. It's looking for anything that deviates from the norm. Let's say you usually log in from your office in London between 9 and 5. Entra ID picks up on this. But if you suddenly try to log in from a cafe in Bali at 3 a.m., That raises a red flag.
So it's like Entra ID has this built-in intuition, spotting things that just feel off. But what happens next? Does it just lock you out?
Not necessarily. Entra ID is smart enough to understand context. It might prompt you for additional verification, like a fingerprint scan or a one-time code sent to your phone. This adaptive authentication helps ensure that it's really you logging in, even from an unusual location.
So it's not just about blocking access, it's about verifying identity in a way that's both secure and user-friendly. That's impressive. But let's get back to something we touched on earlier, privileged access management, or PAM. I know it's about securing those super important accounts, but how does it actually work in practice?
Think of PAM as the ultimate security detail for your most critical assets. It focuses on those accounts that have elevated permissions within your systems, the ones that could do some serious damage if they fell into the wrong hands. PAM implements stringent controls, like just-in-time access and multi-factor authentication, specifically for these privileged accounts.
Okay, so it's like having those extra layers of security checks, but only for the people who really need them. That seems like a smart approach. But where does Entra ID fit into the PAM picture? Are they separate systems or do they work together?
This is where it gets really interesting. Entra ID seamlessly integrates with leading PAM solutions. This integration allows organizations to manage both general user identities and privileged accounts from a single platform.
So it's not about choosing one over the other. It's about combining their strengths to create this super secure environment. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the power of visibility. Entra ID's integration with SIEM platforms provides security teams with a comprehensive view of user activity across the entire organization. They can see who's accessing what, when, and from where. This level of insight is crucial for detecting and responding to potential threats.
We talked about some before, security information and event management. It's like having a central security command center, monitoring all the activity logs and alerts, right? But how does it specifically relate to identity management and Entra ID?
Let's say you see some suspicious activity in your SIEM logs. Maybe someone is trying to access sensitive data that they shouldn't have access to. By integrating Entra ID with your SIEM, you can immediately see who that user is, what their role is, and what other systems they've accessed. This connected view helps security teams quickly assess the situation, determine the scope of the potential threat, and take appropriate action.
It's like connecting the dots between all these different security events. Identity becomes this key piece of the puzzle, helping to make sense of the bigger picture. It sounds like Entra ID isn't just a standalone identity management solution. It's becoming a central component of a comprehensive security strategy.
You're absolutely right. In today's world, identity is the new perimeter. It's not just about protecting your network anymore, it's about protecting the identities that have access to your data, wherever they may be.
That's a powerful way to think about it. Identity is the new perimeter. It really highlights how crucial identity management is in the modern security landscape. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about external users. We live in a world of collaboration, constantly working with partners, vendors, and customers. How does Entra ID handle those external identities?
That's a great question. Entra ID offers dedicated solutions for both business-to-business, B2B, and business-to-consumer, B2C scenarios. These solutions provide organizations with the tools they need to securely manage external identities and collaborate effectively.
Okay, break those down for me. Let's start with Entra ID B2B. How does it simplify collaborations with external partners?
Imagine you're working on a confidential project with a partner company. You need to give them access to specific files and resources, but you also want to ensure that access is tightly controlled and secure. That's where Entra ID B2B comes in. It allows you to easily invite your partners into a secure collaborative space, grant them the necessary permissions, and revoke those permissions just as easily. When the project is over.
So it's like creating this secure digital room where everyone has the right level of access to collaborate effectively without compromising security. It sounds incredibly efficient.
Exactly. It streamlines the onboarding process, reduces administrative overhead, and provides a central hub for managing all your B2B collaborations.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about Entra ID B2C. How does it differ from B2B? And what are the benefits for organizations that are dealing with customer identities?
Entra ID B2C focuses on managing customer identities and providing secure and seamless access to your applications and services. Think about a retail website or a mobile banking app. That requires users to create accounts, Entra ID B2C can streamline that registration process, offer easy logins with social media accounts or existing credentials, and even integrate with identity verification services to prevent fraud.
So it's not just about security, it's about creating a positive user experience for customers, making it easy for them to access the services they need while also protecting their data.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between security and usability. You want your customers to feel confident that their data is safe, but you also don't want to create unnecessary friction in their experience.
That's a delicate balance to strike. It sounds like Entra ID BDC provides the tools to do just that. But let's zoom out for a moment and consider the bigger picture. We've talked about all these impressive features. But why is identity management such a critical aspect of security in today's world?
In the past, security was all about building walls around your network. You had your firewalls, your intrusion detection systems, all designed to keep the bad guys out. But in today's cloud-centric world, that perimeter has dissolved. People are accessing data from everywhere, from their homes, from coffee shops, from airports. The focus has shifted from protecting the network to protecting the identities that access the network.
So it's not about the walls anymore. It's about who has the keys to the doors, regardless of where those doors might be located.
Exactly. Identity has become the new battleground in cybersecurity. If you can protect identities, you can protect your data, your applications, your entire organization. And that's why Entra ID is such a powerful tool. It provides organizations with the capabilities they need to adapt to this new reality and secure their digital future.
I'm really struck by this idea of identity as the new perimeter. It completely reframes how we think about security, but it also begs the question, if identity is the new perimeter, what are the key considerations for organizations as they build out their identity management strategies? Where should they focus their efforts?
Well, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Organizations need to consider their unique needs, their risk tolerance, and the regulatory landscape they operate in. They need to ask themselves some fundamental questions.
Okay, give me an example. What are some of those fundamental questions that organizations should be asking themselves?
First and foremost, they need to understand their users. Who are they? What level of access do they need? Are they employees, partners, or customers? Once you understand your users, you start thinking about the types of threats they might face and the level of security they require.
So it's about identifying those different user groups and their specific needs and risks.
Exactly. Then you need to think about the data you're protecting. What's the sensitivity level? What are the consequences of a data breach? The answers to these questions will guide your decisions about access controls, authentication methods, and other security measures.
It's about understanding the value of your data and the potential impact of losing it.
Absolutely. And of course, you need to consider the compliance landscape. Are there specific regulations or data privacy laws that apply to your industry?
Compliance is always a crucial piece of the puzzle.
You're right. It's not just about best practices. It's about meeting legal and regulatory requirements. Once organizations have a good grasp of these factors, their users, their data, and their compliance obligations, they can start to develop an identity management strategy that's tailored to their specific needs.
It's a process of discovery and assessment, not just jumping into a solution without a clear plan. We've talked a lot about the technical side of things, but what about the human element? How can organizations ensure that users understand the importance of security and embrace these identity management practices?
That's a critical aspect that's often overlooked. Technology is only part of the solution. We need to focus on educating users about security best practices and empowering them to take ownership of their own digital identities.
So it's about creating a culture of security awareness, where everyone understands the importance of protecting their accounts and data. But how do you actually achieve that?
It starts with communication. Organizations need to be transparent about their security policies, explain why certain measures are in place, and make it clear what's expected of users. They also need to provide regular security awareness training, using engaging and relatable content. That helps users understand the real-world implications of security threats.
So it's not just about technical training. It's about helping people understand the why behind the what. And how can organizations empower users to take ownership of their own digital identities?
By giving them the tools and resources they need to manage their accounts securely. This includes things like enabling self-service password reset, promoting the use of strong passwords, and multi-factor authentication, and providing clear guidance on how to report suspicious activity.
It's about making security easy and accessible for everyone.
Exactly. When users feel empowered and informed, they're more likely to embrace security practices and become active participants in protecting the organization.
It's a shift from a top-down enforcement-driven approach to a more collaborative and empowering one.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture of shared responsibility, where everyone understands that security is everyone's job.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. We've explored so many facets of Entra ID, from its technical capabilities to its role in a comprehensive security strategy, and the importance of user empowerment. I'm feeling much more informed about the world of identity management, and I'm sure our listeners are too. It really feels like this whole conversation about Entra ID, it's a real shift in how we think about security.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about firewalls and antivirus software anymore. It's about understanding that identity. Identity is at the core of modern security.
Yeah, because in a world where we're accessing data from everywhere, our phones, laptops, even smart devices, that traditional network perimeter, it's almost irrelevant now.
Exactly. The focus has really shifted to protecting the individual accessing the network, not just the network itself. And that's really where identity management solutions like Entra ID come in. They provide the tools and capabilities to secure those identities, regardless of where they are or what devices they're using.
It's like, you know that old saying, trust but verify?
Yeah.
But applied to the digital age, you want to enable access and collaboration, but you also need to be sure that the person accessing your data is who they say they are.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between security and usability. You don't want to create too many roadblocks, that hinder productivity, but you also can't afford to be lax on security. And that's where Entra ID really shines. It offers all these features that enhance security without impacting the user experience.
Right. And we talked about multi-factor authentication, which adds that extra layer of security during logins and single sign-on, which simplifies access to a bunch of different applications with just one set of credentials.
Right. And let's not forget self-service password reset, which lets users manage their own accounts without having to go to IT every time.
Yeah, these features, not only do they improve security, but they also streamline workflows and make life easier for everyone involved. But let's be realistic. Implementing a solution like Entra ID, it's really just the first step. The real challenge is ongoing management and adaptation.
Oh, absolutely. The threat landscape is constantly evolving, so organizations really need to stay ahead of the curve, this means. Regularly reviewing security policies, conducting those vulnerability assessments, and just keeping up with the latest security best practices.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. But for organizations that might be feeling overwhelmed, what are some steps, some practical steps they can take to strengthen their identity management? Where should they focus their efforts?
I always say start with the basics. Make sure you have a clear understanding of who your users are, what level of access they need, what data they're authorized to access. It might involve a user inventory and review.
So know your audience
Yeah,
and tailor those security measures accordingly.
exactly. Then implement strong authentication, like multi-factor authentication.
Right.
Especially for those accounts with elevated permissions. And don't forget about regular security awareness training for your employees. Human error, it's still one of the biggest security vulnerabilities. So educating your workforce about best practices is essential.
So empowering your employees to be part of the security solution, not just potential points of weakness.
Exactly. And remember, security isn't just an IT issue, it's a business issue. It needs a holistic approach. You need buy-in from leadership. You need to foster a culture of security awareness across the whole organization. Integrate security into everything you do.
It's like weaving security into the fabric of your organization. It's in your DNA.
Well said. And lastly, don't be afraid to ask for help. You know if you need it. There are lots of resources out there, security consultants, industry groups, and of course, Microsoft's own documentation and support services.
It's a team effort. You don't have to go it alone. This has been a really incredible deep dive into the world of Entra ID and identity management. I feel like we've really gotten a good understanding, not just of the technology, but its wider implications for security in this digital age.
I agree. It's been really interesting. And I hope our listeners now have a better appreciation for how important identity management is, especially with today's complex threats.
I think if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, it's that identity is the new perimeter. And securing those identities is absolutely essential to protecting your organization, protecting your data and your reputation in the digital world.
Absolutely. By embracing a proactive approach to identity management, a holistic approach, and a user-centric approach, organizations can mitigate their risks, empower their employees, and create a more secure and productive digital environment.
That is a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Entra ID. Stay secure out there.